Today, we're going to get into the really powerful ideas from Sherronda J. Brown's book, Refusing Compulsory Sexuality. We're going to explore how our culture basically treats sexual desire as mandatory and, what happens when that idea collides with the complexities of race. So let's just dive right in. So the author starts us off with a scene that I think we can all kind of relate to. You mentioned you don't like something that everybody supposedly loves, coffee, ice cream, and you get this look of just total shock, disbelief even. People just can't seem to wrap their heads around the fact that your desire just isn't there. It's a simple little analogy, but it's our doorway into understanding the much, much more intense reaction people have to a lack of sexual desire. And this gets to a really fundamental question, doesn't it? Why do we, as a culture, treat certain desires like they're universal truths? Why does someone else's lack of desire feel like a personal problem or something that needs to be fixed? This is exactly where we pivot from something simple like coffee to the far more loaded topic of sex. Right, so that shocked reaction you get for not liking ice cream, well, it gets magnified 1,000 times when the desire we're talking about is sexual. Society doesn't just prefer that you experience sexual desire. It basically operates as if it's a non-negotiable mandate, a fundamental requirement for being a normal, healthy human being. There's actually an academic term for this whole phenomenon. It's called compulsory sexuality. And what it is this powerful, often invisible system of social roles that just assumes everyone is sexual. It pushes all of us to be, quote, desiring subjects. And in doing that, it marginalizes anyone who falls outside that norm, pressuring them to conform. So this mandate is held up by this whole set of unwritten rules that we just absorb from our culture. We're constantly told that sexual desire is universal, that sex is just a necessary, natural part of life. And the unspoken message there is that if you lack that desire, you're somehow broken or stunted, underdeveloped. This whole foundation is what makes asexuality seem so confusing, or maybe even impossible to a lot of people. Okay, now things get even more complex when we start to bring race into the analysis. For Black individuals, the pressure of compulsory sexuality is intensified by a long and frankly painful history of racial power structures that were designed specifically to define and control Black bodies. And this introduces this really critical concept of utility. See, during slavery and colonialism, the value of a Black person's body was tied directly to how useful it was. Useful for labor and useful for reproduction to create more labor. Their own desires, their own autonomy, they just weren't even part of the equation. This created an absolutely impossible trap, especially for Black women who were forced into these two completely contradictory roles. On one side, you had the Jezebel stereotype, which painted them as hypersexual and seductive, which, by the way, was used to justify sexual violence. And then on the other side, you have the mammy stereotype, which totally desexualized them, casting them as these subservient caregivers. Both of these were just tools to control and police Black women's bodies and deny them any kind of authentic sexual self. And this is the devastating outcome. These historical narratives construct Blackness in the dominant imagination as something that is just always available for sexualization. Consent becomes irrelevant because the script has already been written and forced onto Black bodies. So what happens when you combine that universal mandate of compulsory sexuality with the very specific racist sexual scripts that are forced onto Black people? Well, you arrive at what the author calls an impossible identity, the Black asexual. And here's the core paradox. It's really something. On one hand, mainstream society links sexuality with being fully human, right? To lack it is to be seen as robotic or less than. But on the other hand, Blackness has been historically dehumanized by being framed as hypersexual, as animalistic. See? Both paths lead to dehumanization. This personal testimony just makes that paradox painfully real. You have a Black asexual person wondering if their own experience is somehow a betrayal of their race, because the cultural story says Blackness is inherently sexual. The internal conflict that these external pressures create is, well, it's immense. And there it is, stated as plainly as possible. Within a system that defines Blackness as hypersexual and defines humanness as allosexual, a person who is both Black and asexual becomes a logical contradiction. Their very existence challenges the foundations of these oppressive systems. But what if this impossibility isn't a lack at all? What if it's actually a form of resistance? The book reframes Black asexuality as this powerful rejection of the scripts that society tries to force upon people. Think about that. Just by being, by existing, the Black asexual person refuses the dehumanizing stereotype of the hypersexualized Black body. They refuse the idea that their worth is tied to their sexual availability. It is an act of profound self-determination. Okay, so let's zoom out for a second to the even bigger picture here. This pressure isn't just about sex. It's part of a larger system the author calls chrononormativity. And that's this idea that our lives are supposed to follow a strict, productive timeline. School, job, marriage, kids. This schedule frames our sexual and reproductive lives as a form of productivity that ultimately serves the economy. At its very core, this economic system completely redefines our human value. We are taught from a very young age that our worth comes from what we produce, whether that's goods in a factory or children in a home. Our fundamental value as people becomes tied to our output. And this is what connects everything back together. By refusing the mandate to be sexual in a normal way, a person is also refusing to have their body's value defined by how useful it is to this larger system. It's a rejection of being seen as just another productive instrument. And this leaves us with a final and pretty profound question. The book challenges us to really think about where our value truly comes from. If our worth isn't based on our productivity, sexual or otherwise, then what is it based on? It pushes us to imagine a world where human value is inherent, something you have just by being, not something you have to earn.